All right, thanks everyone. We're going to kick off. We've still got people joining us, but we've got some introductions to get through first, and then of course we will get into the detail. So today's webinar: how can you safeguard your business from insolvency, and what are the warning signs to look for? We've got the best and brightest from credit and insolvency joining us today. We're very fortunate to have three fantastic guests. We've got the CEO of the Australian Institute of Credit Management, AICM, Nick Pilibides. Hey Nick, how you going?
Great, Pat, yourself?
Good, thank you. We've got Jeanette Muller, Director of GM Advisory. Great to have you back, Jeanette.
Thanks very much.
And I believe newcomer, first time round, Andrew Blundell from Cathron Partners, Principal at Cathron Partners. How are you, Andrew?
Good, thanks, Nick. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to a big panel today with some heads of industry. It should be good.
Yeah, that's right. We've got some great minds. So very fortunate to have all three of you with us. So thank you for that. A really quick intro. Credit Watch, obviously a credit reporting bureau, but we really operate as a technology and data company. We've got an end-to-end solution from helping you to onboard your customers, obviously assess them, perform ongoing due diligence, keep an eye on them with monitoring and alerts, all the way through to the end of the life cycle for a customer, which is payments. We've got an automated collection software that we rolled out about 12 months ago, which is going really well. So if you've got any questions about that, please let me know or contact us. But we're not here to talk about our solutions today. We're here to talk about what's happening in the economy and of course what is happening from an insolvency perspective. Just very quickly, from an economic outlook perspective, there's a lot going on. It'd be pretty difficult for you to not be aware of what's happening out there. If you don't listen to the radio, don't have the television on, don't read anything on the internet or open a newspaper, then you're doing quite well. It's going to be really tough. It's tough at the moment, particularly for small and medium businesses, and it's only going to get tougher. We wouldn't be surprised if we see some really large businesses going to administration on top of obviously the small, medium, and sort of mid-sized corporates that are going into administration at the moment. It is, as I said, going to get worse, we believe, and we've got a bit of an estimate on what we expect from a probability of default perspective. I'll touch on some of the key numbers that we're seeing, of course, through our regular monthly business risk index that looks at all the sort of events around insolvencies and defaults. A couple of notes here. So by September 23, the full impact of the RBA's 11 cash rate rises, which is probably continuing to increase at this rate, there'll be more than that, will be fully passed on. And it's going to affect obviously about 40% of Australian households. I think one of the big stats that sticks out for me is in the second half of this calendar year, we have more people coming off fixed rates than in the first half. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on the consumer and therefore the businesses' wallets as we all start paying a lot more, either as a result of interest rate rises or inflation, which the RBA is obviously prioritizing to get on top of. Retail volumes are falling, and that was already spoken about in sort of December, Jan, when the Q2 numbers came out for those big retailers that are obviously public on the public companies. Sorry, I try to get my words out there. Consumer confidence, as we know, is at record lows. Business confidence isn't doing that great either, and there's still this uncertainty around when the cash rate will stop being cut. When will we get a plateau, and potentially when will we even start to see some rate cuts in the future? I think from a business perspective, a lot of organisations are obviously doing it tough out there at the moment, and as I said, it's only going to get tougher from here. However, we did see through COVID an amazing ability for Australian businesses to be resilient through tough times. I think we're set up in a way that investment has been made in technology, in automation, fat has been cut from businesses. We're operating a lot more efficiently than what I would say, 2019 and before that. So that's a good sign. The question will be when that certainty comes back into the economy and having a clear line of sight through to when rate rises will confidently not go up anymore, and then potentially the next hurdle or positive sign of certainty and future investment will be when do we think rate cuts could take place. But that seems to have been kicked out from late 2023 calendar to probably looking more like mid to late 24. But who knows? It's tough out there to be a central banker, regardless of whether you're running the RBA or you're in the US, the UK, or any of the other nations around the world. Everyone seems to be really struggling to get on top of obviously the inflation dragon, and the numbers that come out on a daily, weekly basis quite often are contradicting one another, which makes obviously future predictions very difficult to do. So good luck to them, but let's keep moving along. What are we seeing? So some of the numbers that we're starting to see now from a trade payment default perspective, from a court actions perspective, insolvencies are all going up. It's the sort of numbers we probably expected to see. What are we in? Middle of June already? Probably expected to see this time 3 years ago in 2020, when we lived in that upside down world where no one worked, but insolvencies went backwards. Sorry, a lot of businesses were closed. A lot of people were working. I should correct myself there. A lot of businesses were obviously closed as a result of lockdowns, but despite that, insolvencies went down, and we were down sort of 40% on pre-COVID numbers. Those numbers are all roaring back now. We can see here trade payment defaults. So they're defaults registered by Creditor Watch customers within our bureau, so unique to Creditor Watch. In order to get access to that, you've got to be a Creditor Watch customer. So if you're not, hit up one of our salespeople, please. We are seeing, a trend upwards. We're seeing, we're almost back to, if you squint there, you can see almost back to May 2019 numbers, and certainly above, 21 and 22. This will likely continue to rise. We've seen that creditors have moved away from that sort of sympathetic part of time, of history, where they were nursing one another through, nursing customers through, and now it is certainly getting back to a normal trading environment where if you can't pay your bills, a default will come, a court action will come, and ultimately you will likely end up in administration, particularly if the debt is large enough. If we look at the Creditor Watch default rate prediction, so we create a credit rating for every business and company in Australia, including sole traders, trusts, and partnerships, and then we have a national one which we're looking at now. So this is the Australian National Default Rate Predictor, and that shaded area is essentially saying that is what the future 12 months from each point will be. So we're obviously predicting 12 months in advance in terms of a probability of default. Steep increase that we expect to see, going above and beyond what we sort of saw back in late 2019, early 2020, and pushing up to sort of 5.8% from a predicted default rate perspective. Obviously, if you then look in individual locations, if you look in individual industries, the default rate changes depending on how they're affected by discretionary spend, obviously, lockdowns, labor shortages, the cost of goods changes dramatically from industry to industry. So there's lots of different nuanced variables out there that make a big difference. But just looking at the whole of Australia here as one. Here we go, probability of default by industry. Leading the way, transport, post and warehousing has actually moved into the first position. Accommodation was number one not that long ago, and then ag has increased significantly as well. Some telltale ones, manufacturing performing quite well, and the construction is always the sort of really challenging one that people always look at first, particularly the media. I think it's unfairly reported on, though it is obviously back to pre-COVID levels, above pre-COVID levels from an insolvency perspective. But we also did see a huge number of new businesses in the construction and building space pop up over the last 2 or 3 years, as a lot of people went out on their own. We start to find that, sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit quick there. Start to find that, you know, in boom times, you know, individuals will leave, you know, salaried jobs and start their own businesses because there's a huge amount of work there, good money to be made. And then what we see is when times get tough, those individuals go back to working on, you know, larger projects as a salaried employee, and that's certainly playing its part. But that industry itself is obviously doing it really tough from a number of reasons. There's been plenty reported on, from, you know, the cost of materials and labour shortages, but of course fixed rate contracts for you know, residential housing has played havoc with that particular sector within the construction industry as a whole. All right, so enough from me. I wanted to get through that as quickly as possible. We get to move on to the experts now, and I get to pass over to Nick to talk us through some of the findings and verbatim that he's hearing out of the Australian Institute of Credit Management, which is the leading association for and lobbyists for credit managers in Australia. So Nick, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick, and great to be part of the webinar and talk about what we're seeing and what's going on. I definitely echo a lot of your findings there and what you reported there, that there's lots of doom and gloom happening out there and lots for credit professionals to be really concerned about. But I'll try and be a bit more optimistic and positive here, because I think while there is definitely deteriorating conditions and pressures on credit providers to avoid the risk that comes with that, I think there is a lot of control that organisations can have over that risk at the moment and be able to get the best outcomes for that. So I guess sort of to build a bit of a picture, what we've got there is some information from a survey that we did in February, March this year, where we surveyed over 100 or around 100 of our members who are involved in credit management day in, day out on the tools. They reported that their collection performance was still going pretty well in 2022 compared to 2021. Significantly 36% had increased or improved their performance in 2020, which was a bit of a 2022, which was a bit of a surprise, because 2020 and 2021 were historically fantastic collections performances. Cash payments were flowing in, as you said, that upside down expectation. Members are reporting the best ledgers they've ever had. Lots of factors to that, but that was still showing some improvement in 22, although it was a lot less than in 21. In 21, 60% of members had improved performance in 21. So definitely some signs that the pressures were starting to flow through, and that sort of tracked where we saw some increases in insolvencies towards the end of last year. And on the next slide, when we asked our members what they expect this year in terms of insolvencies, that 25% expected significant increase, most expected a moderate increase, and about 20% were relatively optimistic that it'd be about the same as last year. I guess as we're moving on, we're seeing that our members got it right. There's at least a moderate increase, good chances of a significant increase at least, and those one or two that expected a decrease, I'm sorry, they're going to be disappointed, but they might have been more talking about what they expect in their ledgers. Because when we move on to the next slide,
Maybe they hit the wrong button there, Nick.
Oh, they
might be something like that. But when we look at how they expect their collections performance to perform in the next year, over 25% expected to improve, just under 40 to stay the same, and around 35% expecting some deterioration. So that's relatively positive, considering how much insolvency we're expecting, how much pressures have started to flow through. So it does show that the credit professionals feel that they are empowered to improve results and manage that risk that's coming through. And I think a bit of perspective that things weren't all that great in 2019. So getting back to those sorts of levels is what credit professionals are trained to do, are used to doing, and are equipped to be able to manage that. Obviously, staying on top of it has never been more important because you want to minimise those increases as we move forward, but credit professionals are empowered to manage that. So some of the things that they can do, I think, and I know there's a lot of non-credit professionals, small businesses and things involved in this webinar. I think boiling it down to what you can do to minimise risk comes down to 4 key things, which comes down to people, processes, communication and security. Around people, this graph really shows it nicely for us, and the next one, that we segmented our results by our certified credit executives, our CCEs, compared to our other members, and both are great and both get much better results than others, but we saw a significant difference here with the blue bit being our CCEs. So around 10% of it was 10% greater improved performance amongst CCEs than there were than non-CCEs, and a lot less had deteriorating results in 2022 compared to members. So not saying one's better than the other, although if you want to improve your performance, maybe hire a CCE or get your CCE, and that might help your performance. But clearly it shows what we all know, that investing in your accounts receivable, in your collections and your risk areas will lead to better results. This shows it by way of investing in people, making sure you've got experienced people that have been recognised with their CCE. They're better able to manage the data that you're looking at, the processes, better able to communicate with your customers. And the next slide supports that as well, where we're looking at that future outlook. And again, there's significantly a better outlook of those CCEs. They might be more optimistic, or might be more confident in their own capabilities to manage it. But again, those CCEs feel empowered with what their knowledge they have, their tools and equipment to be able to manage the risk that's going on. That's my slides, I think, but some other thoughts I had were around how to manage the insolvency risk around best practice systems and data. We need great people, but they need great systems and data to be able to manage that. And we've really seen that over the last 2 years where organisations have invested in it. But ensuring you've got the best people is important to get the best data and processes. It's no point having the best system in the world unless you've got the best people to manage those and work it through. Those systems free up the credit professionals or yourselves to have those conversations with customers, to target your efforts to those that can't pay rather than those that are a bit late, or maybe those that are a bit late, you target your efforts there to get that cash in. So it can allow your people to be a lot more efficient in what they're doing. And I think you noted there in what you do there at Credit to watch the onboarding, which reminded me that if you're trying to avoid insolvency risk, you've got to get your onboarding 100% right up front. There's no point trying to mitigate some risk or do something when they're not paying unless you've onboarded them properly with the right names, ABNs, and all those details are important up front. So another little tip there. The other thing I think is really important to get. Sorry, Patrick.
No, sorry. I was just concurring with you there. Keep going, Nick.
And yeah, communication's the other thing. I think when we talk about data and technology, we all think that can do it for us, but making sure we're having those conversations with customers is the real way that we're going to be able to manage this risk. That there's lots of industries that are struggling, lots of businesses within those that are struggling, but equally there's lots of great businesses out there. Getting the data and things like that can help you understand which ones are displaying the signs of risks. But if to just go on that, you're going to be eliminating good customers. That needs to target your efforts into talking to those customers that are displaying risks, engage with them to really understand what's happening in their business, find out how you can do business with them, or really work out which businesses you can't do business with or shouldn't be doing business with. And that's that person-to-person communication by phone calls. Using these platforms are great this day and age. You can engage a lot more customers visually as well, which will get a much better relationship. or the old-fashioned going out to the customer's premises. There's never a better way to see how a customer's going than walking through a premises. And the last tip is, of course, our securities, your personal property security and personal guarantees and those things that you can get documented, hopefully with as many customers as you can, but definitely those ones that show elements of a bit more risk, because we don't want to trade with customers, don't want to eliminate trading with customers just because they're showing some signs of risk. Putting appropriate securities in there can help you manage that risk and give you the best chance of recovery if insolvency does occur. In particular on PPS, I hear a lot of customer members say that they don't like PPS because the stock doesn't just come flowing back to them. But if you've got that PPS register, you're at the table and you're able to engage with the insolvency professional and get the best possible outcome. It's well worth the investment of $7 or whatever it is to register it, to get you at that table to have that best chance of recovery there. So definitely get more experts myself on that.
There's a lot of things you can do as a creditor with a security interest that you may or may not be able to do without it. It's opening up, again, coming back to your communication piece, that dialogue with the appointee, working through that process with them, putting them on notice that you've got a registration and holding them to task, making sure that they're doing their job too, because there's a lot of instances where there's a lot of confusion still about the PPS and what's required and who needs to do what by when. So you've got a trusted person in your network that you can refer to, your lawyer, an insolvency practitioner if there is one. There's a lot of things that you can do to make sure that you stay at the front of the queue in terms of recoveries in circumstances where someone like myself or Jeanette's appointed to something. And at the end of the day, by having that in place, again, you're just protecting your potential downside going forward. And that's very important to be looking at the moment. I'm sure Jeanette's the same as me. There's so many different weird and wonderful tweaks in terms of making sure your registration's on the right company. If it's a trust, then it needs to be on the ABN of the trust. Like, there's a whole range of things that you need to be on top of. And given the data that you and Pat have just worked through, and knowing that this is going to continue for a period of time, now's the perfect time to be looking at those registrations and making sure that they're in place and valid and enforceable.
I should pop in there and say, once upon a time when I was a liquidator, back in the old days, yes, absolutely, Andrew, 100% right. But I was actually going to ask Nick, do you think there's many companies these days that don't ask for personal guarantees? Are we now in a world where, everyone but maybe the tax office is sort of, insisting, and they've got other measures, of course, to keep us all on the right path. But are there many companies who don't ask for a PG?
It's a good question. I think everyone likes to ask for them. Whether they get them is another thing, and that's definitely something I'm seeing a lot of pushback in the various groups that represent consumers or small businesses, that there shouldn't be that need for guarantees, especially for trade credit. Seems to be where they push back on. Bit of education is required there about how much that trade credit supports business. For those that don't know, it's equal to bank finance. There was a report out by ASA a couple of years ago that said that trade credit was, I think, about 44%, and bank credit was 46% of the credit that businesses were relying on. So it is just as important to those businesses as bank credits.
And I think just on that as well, I think, yeah, you're right. A lot of people ask for it, but they're probably not enforcing it at the onboarding stage. So any way you can put it into a nice, easy to use, platform or onboarding tool makes a big difference. In today's day and age, we've all got access to everything we want via our phone in our hands. So, there's an expectation at the end of the day for someone who's filling in an application form that it's got to be as good as what they're used to with the Apples and the Amazons and whatnot of the world. And if you can make it easy to complete, that makes a big difference. Similar with the PPSR, if you're not putting it into as your onboarding workflow, you're unlikely to probably capture the right details, even if you are doing a registration. And then the last point I just wanted to make, I think that the investment in education of people is really important. I think, through boom times, a lot of people look good compared to, in tough times that we're in at the moment, where I think those without the experience, without the knowledge, without the training, without, the exposure to the sessions that AICM run, they get found out. So you really want to make sure that you've got the best people, the best trained people, the best educated people in these key, credit and collection roles as we move into this extended, downturn that we're certainly going to have. Can't ignore that.
Absolutely.
All right. I wanted to pass over to Andrew now, who's going to talk through path to insolvency and some common signs, and no doubt get into a bit of a discussion around this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I'm going to be like Nick. Not everything's doom and gloom. There's obviously been an increase in insolvencies over the last period, and like Pat suggested, based on what he's seeing from the credit watch side of things, it's likely to continue. There is a whole range of things that you can be looking at in terms of early warning signs that will give you, as a credit professional or as a business owner, some context into what may or may not be happening in that business that you're dealing with, and then obviously how or what can you think about doing going forward in relation to making sure that you don't end up in a position where someone like me is appointed, you don't have proper PPS registrations, your guarantee hasn't been signed properly, and you're kind of the last person or the last cab on the rank in terms of your returns. So there's two slides here where I've just put up a whole range of different things that I see as early warning signs in relation to people that are under cash flow stress and effectively working capital stress. So there's a whole range of things that I see and I report in my creditors' reports to creditors and to ASIC around the circumstances how a company has found itself in a position where they're not in a position to pay their debts as and when they fall due. And there's three main areas that I'll keep coming back to. One is around the management of the particular business and their capacity to actually be good at what they do and to make sure that their business continues to work through the relevant business life cycles. And that changes over time. So if you're in a really growth heavy focused business, you might have a management team in place for the first 12, 18 months, 2 years that's really reflective of the challenges in that particular growth phase of the business. But then you get to a point where it's starting to mature, and that particular management team may not be the best for that particular stage of the business, and people tend to take their eye off the ball. They get comfortable in the things that they know about, and at the end of the day, that leads to a slow decline and sometimes a fast decline depending on the industry. And it's a lot of these signs come off the back of that decline. So there's obviously some obvious ones here. Deteriorating performance. If you're seeing exceptional accounts on a yearly basis as part of your process where you're reviewing credit terms or people are asking for extensions, etc., that's an indicator that there's something wrong in terms of the business overall. If you're seeing balance sheet items that don't reflect what the value of the underlying assets are, whether that's something like there's a goodwill component that keeps increasing, there's plant and equipment that's being held at cost value rather than market value that may have diminished over a period of time, there's issues in terms of depreciation and it being identified and correctly accounted for. Those types of things are things that you can see just by that quick analysis over an extended period of time. In terms of the CapEx side of things, again, if people aren't investing in their capital expenditure over extended periods, or there's a large investment 1 year and nothing in terms of maintenance for the next 3 or 4 years, that's something that's potentially an early warning sign as well. Dividends exceeding performance, I see that all the time, especially in some of my small to medium companies where people aren't taking a wage, they're making distributions out of loan accounts at 30 June to true up their tax position. All of those types of things are, again, warning signs. The related party loans is becoming a more significant issue, again, because we've had this period over the last 3 years when no one's really been enforcing in terms of debts, and directors have just got used to the lifestyle that they've been able to lead over that period of time, picked up huge related party loan balances, aren't in a position to repay those, and that obviously inflates the asset position of the business too. So all of those types of things are things that I see on multiple occasions. The management resignations is another thing. If there's a CFO that's been there for a long period of time, they suddenly resign, is not replaced for a period of 1, 2, 3 months, or the person that is replaced doesn't have the same capability, again, that's something that points to issues within the business. If you jump to the next slide, Pat.
Just on that last one as well, around management resignations, you know, we've got slides and evidence around, you know, a company with a single director is, you know, riskier generally than a company with, you know, 4 or 5 directors, or where there's been a number of director resignations in a period of time is also contributing to an increase in the probability of defaults. Not to say it happens all the time, but, you know, all of those sort of little 1% changes can lead to, you know, failure in the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually not that uncommon at this point in time to see that happening. We're doing some safe harbor engagements for some small listed cap companies, and yeah, the first line is the CFO's gone. 1 or 2 months later, they're coming to us to look at what they can potentially do in terms of restructuring before a formal engagement's required, and that's something we're seeing quite frequently at present. Just in terms of this next slide, this is more in relation to the cash flow side of things. So, I mean, there's some obvious ones in here as well. Reduced cash, you're maxing out your credit limits, which I'm sure your client base and your association's members, Nick, are seeing as well. Deteriorating liquidity ratios. So I don't know if there's if it's more I guess a business focused or an accounting focused background here, but a pretty current asset ratio is a quick calculation you can do, your current assets over your current liabilities. If you look at the trend analysis for that over a period of time, you can get some inkling in terms of the cash flow pressures that are being experienced by a particular business. And the same whole range of cash flow issue signs, obviously, that I see in multiple appointments. Not paying the ATO, not paying your payroll tax, your balances are blowing out. Your cash conversion cycle, which is effectively the cycle from when you make a sale to when you get cash in the bank for that sale, is extending or becoming a longer period of time. Your stock is again becoming problematic in that the balances are increasing, and the time that the debtor terms take to pay back for that stock's also increasing. So there's all those types of things you can look at that give you some insight in terms of what may or may not be happening in the business. And if you jump to the next slide.
Just really quickly on that last one as well, Andrew. I think you know, the question around personal guarantees, for example, is sort of linked to financials. You know, I think there's this real, understandably, you know, sensitivity around providing financials, but you know, I think if you're a creditor and you're dealing with a company and they're asking for a credit limit of, you know, a certain limit, you should have a rule in there where if they don't provide, you know, recent financials, they don't get access to it. You know, it's amazing what we're seeing now at Credit Watch. We're obviously pulling every ASIC lodged financial statement, right? And there's only I think 20,000. Nick can correct me here. There's only about 20,000 companies in Australia that have to lodge it, but there's a big, there can often be big discrepancies around what their financial position is and what's available out there with from a credit risk perspective. So where possible, where you are able to get financials, it's an incredibly strong way to assess an organisation for credit.
Absolutely, and I'll actually talk a little bit about that on the next slide, Nick, where there's so much information that's available specifically to people that are offering credit terms. And sure, there might be some pushback when you ask for it, but at the same time, if they're requesting extensions of credit for you to try and either maintain their business or grow their business, they shouldn't be in a position where they're not prepared to share that information with you. And yes, you're going to get smaller customers that they're not going to have that information as up to date as they possibly should. But again, if you overlay that over a 1, 2, 3 year period where possible, you can start to pull some of these trends out, and you can notice different changes in the balance sheet where there's new items that are popping up or related party loans that are popping up. And those things are all pieces of information that you can use to inform your decisions about how you approach that. If it's not satisfactory, do you make sure you get a PG in place? If for whatever reason you've got some concern around the industry, do you make sure your PPS registrations are right and they cover the appropriate entities that you're dealing with? And it's really that's really the crux of the job that you need to be thinking, or that you need to be doing when you're considering advancing these amounts of credit and working through whether you take that customer on, whether you limit the amount that you give them, whether you extend it. The other thing that's really helpful from I guess, just an informational perspective, and I do this with a lot of credit managers as part of the AICM side of things and also the Australian Credit Forum, just pick up the phone to your people in your trusted network. They're going to know what's happening in particular industries because of the experience that they've had in it. And they're also, potentially there's a liquidator that's appointed to something that I have a personal relationship with. I can pick up the phone and talk to them and say, hey, my client's been involved in this, where are we standing? What's the end game here? Is there any likelihood of a return, or here's his PPS registration or her PPS registration? Can you give us X, Y, Z? Because we needed to make a decision about what we do in relation to that. So it's using that network that you've got and leaning on them for information that will again help you in terms of making those decisions as credit managers.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions? I should also say, if anyone does have questions, please submit them through the GoToWebinar control panel. I'll jump in at the end and have a little look as well. All right, okay. Jeanette, over to you.
Great.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Patrick. And I can tell that we haven't got much time left, so it's all okay, everyone. I've only got one slide and I'm going to be relatively quick. But look, just for a bit of background on me, because I think it's important to understand my perspective, or my lens, as we like to call it these days. I'm an advisor to small and micro companies. So I help them with understanding their available options in the accounting and their law space, things like stay or go. If I keep trading, should I continue to capitalize the business? Should I restructure? What are the formal and informal options available to me in that context? I just wanted to put that out there so that you can just understand a little bit of where I'm coming from when I give my next piece of the presentation. So as the last panelist, Patrick's asked me to touch on the tail end of the insolvency process. That is, you've been watching your customer, maybe even implemented some of or all of the protections that Andrew and Nick have mentioned, and you can even see that they're spiraling into insolvency. So is there anything more that you can do? And with respect to that, I suppose I've put on this slide very simply, there are a few things that you can do at this point. Let's start with whether or not, we go and see our lawyer and we decide to litigate, we decide to take some action. Well, Patrick's got some really helpful information in Creditor Watch. You can, as a member, you can see who's already been there before you, what they're doing, what's going on with the customer. From a small business perspective, sometimes you've got limited resources, and whether you decide to use those resources in litigation or with your lawyer, personal decisions. Each decision will be different. It may or may not result in the outcome that you're looking for, and you just have to take a look at what are the likely outcomes of that action. Maybe you're better off entering into a negotiation. So we've talked about communication earlier. Again, communicate with the party and see what's going on. Can they enter into a repayment arrangement with you? Maybe that's going to be a better option. Once you get through that, and of course, some companies will have a policy and it'll be non-negotiable. When a customer defaults, these are the processes, this is the action we take. We don't have discretion. So depending on your circumstances will depend on what you do, what levers you have available to you. Assuming we get past that stage, the company goes into administration. Well, there are many different types of administration that you might end up finding your customer in. They could be in a creditor's voluntary, the most common are creditor's voluntary liquidation, voluntary administration, or small business restructuring. I think we're all fairly familiar with creditor's voluntary liquidation or liquidation. That's not a good result for you. That's not going to end well. Statistics show, and I don't have them to hand, but the likely outcome of you getting anything if your customers ended up in liquidation is not good. Very limited chance of you getting anything back unless you've got the insurance, which we spoke about earlier, or you've got the PPSR or some other sort of retention of title. Voluntary administration, you're probably not traveling that well either, but at least you might have the ongoing opportunity to continue to trade with either the administrator, which will be personally guaranteed during that trade-on period by someone like Andrew, which is always good. So hopefully he's got something we can go and pursue if he doesn't pay his bills.
I don't hold them to account too much on that.
And then hopefully the restructured company, when it comes out the other side, will have offered you some cents in the dollar for your prior debt, and you have the opportunity to continue to receive payments for your future debt. Now, small business restructuring, the latest one that we have as a formal type of process, is where the director remains in control of the business during the process. They'll enter into some sort of compromise of debt, usually. We'll just generalize here for the moment. Might be somewhere in the vicinity of 20 cents in the dollar, could be less, could be more. But during that process, they will continue to trade. And there are certain creditors in the small business restructuring process, even before creditors decide whether or not to accept their plan, because this is a little bit like a mini voluntary administration, who the company may require to continue to pay during the period. So even though it's gone into small business restructuring, even though you're a small creditor, you might continue to be paid during that process because it's in the ordinary course of business. Each type of administration, type of situation in small business restructuring will be different. But let's assume it gets through to the other end. You might, A, have got all of your liabilities paid, depending on your circumstances, or B, you might get a compromise of some sort over a period of time and have an ongoing relationship with that company moving forward. So it just depends on the type of administration. Everyone will be different. Now, preferences. All right, at the start earlier, I said, should we enter into a repayment arrangement? What are these other things that we can do? Actions have consequences. If we've decided to enter into a repayment arrangement with the company that is, not traveling so well, we have the potential of setting ourselves up to be pursued by a liquidator at some later point for a preferential payment. So what is preferential payment? I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of it, but essentially within 6 months of a company going into liquidation, if you got paid within that period, you're in a bit of a danger zone. So if you've entered into a repayment arrangement, yeah, you've got a bit of a danger zone. But let's not let the liquidator get off too easy with this. Number one, liquidator has to prove the company is insolvent. And number two, they have to prove that you knew or you suspected that the company was insolvent and that you received an advantage over other creditors. So there's some elements, you know, legal elements, there's some hurdles. It's not a walk in the park for the liquidator. And certainly don't let them get away with just sending you a letter. Make them do some work before you, you know, accept that you did receive a preferential payment. But again, actions have consequences, and it depends on what your risk appetite is for your actions. And then finally, I think the important thing to talk about is, okay, then what happens if my customers going broke, which I hear a lot of in the building industry, then has this domino effect on me. I'm now potentially, you know, in a cash flow problem because my customers haven't paid me, or I've put all my eggs in one basket with a particular customer who owes me a lot of money. And now I'm looking at some sort of restructuring or some sort of administration process, maybe an event of default myself. So now you're in jeopardy. And so now I think the important thing to do here is to start to think about, should I be implementing a plan? What's my process? Who do I need to go and see? What help do I need? Do I potentially need some safe harbor while I'm working through this process? And I know, and I've spoken with Patrick many times in relation to this safe harbor process. I'm a great believer in it. And in periods where there is this uncertainty, when you don't know whether you're going to pour more money into your business, or when you don't know if that debtor is actually going to come good, you know, they've told you that they're just going to be a bit delayed because something else has happened. Whatever that event is that's caused the issues for you, you know that that might cause you to collapse, or you know that might cause you great harm, then you might be better off thinking about, let's put in some protections for me and for the company so that I have the courage and the strength and those protections around me as a director, because you're trying to avoid being sued for insolvent trading. If your company goes into liquidation, maybe you need to put those processes in place. So I'm sorry that that was so quick, but if there's anything in there from all of that you'd like to ask a question on, please feel free.
There's actually, thanks for that, Jeanette, a question that sort of came through just before, or just as you started. But when we do see insolvency signs, and this is a general question, but segues quite nicely, is there something we can do to manage that risk? What should we be doing? We see the insolvency signs. What should we do?
I was thinking that when we're going through Andrew's presentation, there's a lot of signs there, and potentially every business is showing one or two of those. But I think for credit professionals, it's being alert to the signs and then being inquisitive as to why that's happening. As you say, if there's a series of them all heading in that downward spiral, then you start to get more alert. If there's one or two, that's probably a reason to get closer with your customer, understand what's happening, have those discussions, get out to their premises and see if it all stacks up. Is it still going okay, just a couple of strange things happening, or is it something that you need to be across a lot more? Monitor a lot closer, make sure you're chasing them up before the invoices is due. If you're not already doing that, contacting your customer before it's due to make sure everything's okay and the payment's going to be received, and yeah, paying more diligence to those sorts of areas.
And then I guess the next thing, actually cancelling any credit with them, right? Don't let them have access.
It's one of those things, Nick has touched on it, sorry for jumping in, but it's the communication piece and the visibility piece. And there's so many different stories where if you've just taken the time to go visit that particular customer and gone out to the site, if there's nothing left there, then obviously there's a problem. If there's a business humming around and they've got some personal issue or a fire or something that's impacted their cash flow for a short-term period of time, you're in a better position to know, not just on a numbers basis, but on a gut feel basis, whether you support them or whether you then think about your other options, and then do you go legal? Do you think about the entering the repayment process type arrangement? So it's really, really important that you do keep that communication going, you make sure it's open and transparent, and you've got the ability to go out there, you go and physically touch, see things, and figure out how to move forward on that basis.
I think, of course, and this may have already been mentioned, but I think you pull that file and you have a look at that credit application immediately, of course, and you make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. I mean, how many times do we see situations where, oh, we meant to register that PPSR, but it got as far as that desk and then it stopped, or oh, someone didn't pay this fee. I think, you know, that's got to be, someone's got to check someone else's work and make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed ultimately.
Yeah, true. And another comment earlier came through saying this attendee said they went through all their customers and got them to re-sign new credit applications, and they obviously had to change their PPSR and legal names and whatnot. And they found about 5% of customers, you know, needed to be updated formally from a PPSR perspective, but also probably from who they're trading with as well formally. And they hadn't done an update since 2017. So customers, the point that the attendee is making here, Helen, is that, you know, customers did agree to it. They were willing to take it on. So don't just assume that they won't update things if you don't do it. They were happy to obviously update. And they don't let you know. At the end of the day, customers don't let you know if they've sold, if they've changed names, new directors, etc. So you can't rely on the generosity of the customer.
No, Patrick, and I see more and more people restructuring all the time. You know, oh, when I first started in business, I wanted this entity, and now I've gone into this and I've gone into that, and they just do things unilaterally, which is fine, and that's perfectly legal. But they don't bother with those changes, and so you've got to be keeping aware of it all.
Yeah, and far too often these, particularly the older relationships that you've had as a creditor, as a supplier, come back to bite you because you think, oh, you know, it's Jim down the road, it's Jeanette up the road. You know, they've always paid, they've always done the right thing. All of a sudden, it's not that they don't want to do the right thing, but they've got no cash to do the right thing, and you're not set up for it, and you ultimately pay the price, and that can be the reason that you end up going into administration. So really, you have to have that credit policy and framework in place and make sure everyone goes through it from start to finish, even if they've been with you for years and years and years. I've got one other question here. If you're a landlord or property manager considering a small or an SME sized tenant for a property, are there key items or ratios that should be requested to consider their financial feasibility? Andrew, you touched on ratios. I actually did my Australian Institute of Company Director course last year, and they spoke about ratios. I'm sure I've got them written down somewhere, but any advice there?
It just depends on the circumstance. Obviously, there's going to be potentially financiers involved. You've got to understand the monthly repayment position is, whether their cash flow is going to be able to support that. What you can do is actually engage someone to look at that for you. I do those kind of reviews myself. Jeanette probably does too. So more than happy to have a chat to that person directly and just off the record in terms of obligation free, and just look at the situation on a case-by-case basis and give some guidance there.
I think one of the challenges with small business obviously is the availability of financials. They won't be with ASIC because they fall under that 100 million revenue by quite a lot. And their information is often out of date or not current. If you're obtaining financials directly from them, they may not have been through accountants. So definitely get that information as much as you can and understand it. But some other things you can do are asking for a copy of their tax portal to show that they're up to date with their tax payments. That can be just as hard as financials, but people often forget that, and especially if it's for a lease commitment, that might be something that you're more able to get access to. And also the guarantees that we spoke about earlier are a big part of it, and the reports that Creditor Watch and others offer as to their trading history with others and their ability to pay others and other credit providers.
Yeah, and I think something that I think trade credit is often following in the footsteps of lending and finance, where there's more money, there's, technology is invested in probably sooner. And something that's quite prevalent in the financial lending world is this concept of being able to pull, almost cash flow. So you're essentially giving access to the creditor or the supplier the ability to have a look at what money's coming in and out. And there are solutions out there to allow you, or the solution will actually assess whether there's a healthy amount of cash coming in versus what cash is going out. So in lieu of financials, it's difficult to sort of I'm trying to be gentle here, but you can't really fabricate the money that's coming in and out of your main bank account. So that I think is something that us at Creditor Watch see as an opportunity in the future to introduce to the trade credit space, because it certainly works very well in the financial industry, but is yet to be probably pushed a great deal in trade credit. So watch this space. I think if you can get a report as a credit manager without having the expertise or needing to do the work to go through bank statements, but being able to have a report that spits out and goes, these guys are in a good condition from a cash flow perspective, I'd imagine that would be quite valuable. All right, I'm conscious of time. We're a little bit over time, which is fairly standard. A few people have dropped off. I wanted to say one last thing. We've got our FY24 end of 23 survival guide that's on Creditor Watch. Go to creditorwatch.com.au/downloadable resources, or you can go into the news hub to get access to that. And a number of the people presenting today have contributed to that, so thank you. It's a really good guide that you can use internally and share with your teams. And a big thank you, of course, to our presenters today, Nick, Jeanette, and Andrew. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Appreciate the time that goes into it. It's not just showing up and talking. There's plenty of time that goes into putting together slides and working out what is going to be discussed as well. So I really appreciate that. And of course, to everyone who is signed in at the moment and listening, thank you as well for that. Great to see you all, and have a fantastic short week for those of you who got to enjoy the day off yesterday. Thanks, everyone. Take it easy.
Thanks, everyone.